Hello. So, building a business always takes time, but what I've been thinking about lately is there a secret sauce to scaling? And I think there might be. So one of the most important lessons I've learned over 24 years building an investment bank, where I've advised lots and lots of companies about their growth, is that growth just isn't linear. So every company starts tiny, but once it works out what it can scale, how it can scale, growth becomes exponential. And that's a really serious part of growth. So when I look at 24 years, I've seen loads and loads of companies' financials, and they all start to follow the same pattern. And when you see these patterns time and time again, you start to realize, is this the secret sauce? Is there a way that companies double revenue each year once they start scaling? And this happens to almost every single business in the same way. So if I give you a little example, a jewelry business called Vinader, you might have heard of that. When they got to 7.6 million, they started scaling. So it went from 7.6 to 13.9 to 26 million to 56 to 108. So you can start seeing the patterns of doubling emerge. If I look at another example, different industry, Cult Beauty, so a challenger brand online, at 5.8 million revenue, they started their scaling journey. To 13.6 was their next year, to 37.6, to 68.9, to 123. And they're quite similar. Those two patterns are pretty similar. So when you've seen thousands of those patterns all start to look quite similar, that's why I think, is there this doubling principle? Is that the secret sauce to scaling? And even if I look at the mighty Microsoft, we all forget businesses start small, they start somewhere. In 1974, Microsoft started with £16,000 worth of revenue. And I think we forget that. 5 years later, they were still only a couple of million turnover. They went from 16K to 22K, 381K, 1.3 million, 2.4 million. So 5 years, they're still a pretty small business. But then they have their scaling moment where you'll start to see these numbers sound familiar. 17 million, 25 million, 98 million, 200 million, 350 million, 600 million, 1.2 billion, and it goes on and on and on. And it carries on doubling. So every business does start tiny, but once it's found that thing, that secret to scaling, that growth does become exponential, and this doubling principle really does happen. So is that doubling the secret sauce? So what I've loved most about finnCap is watching what I think are two really key stages to growth. The first is what I call the scaling stage. So you probably got to £1 to £3 million revenue, and you've started to know what works. And at that point, there is a moment when you think, right, something's working. I'm now going to go for it. I'm going to scale. There's then the second moment, which I'm calling super scale, which is where you're probably somewhere between 10 and 20 million, and you think, right, I can really build something now. I've got a lot of momentum. I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to really go for it. And then you aim for 50 million. So those two pieces, scaling and super scaling, I think are two critical junctions when you're on the growth journey as an entrepreneur. So that was very consistent in all the businesses I work with. What wasn't consistent was the timing where it felt right. So for all the businesses I work with, and there's many hundreds, there wasn't really any similarity when they felt right to scale and then to super scale, all sorts of different times. But something got me thinking recently is, what about those businesses that never have those moments? What about all those businesses that never get that moment where they think to scale, or they get that moment where they think to super scale? And I look back and thought, well, in my career, every company that's come to us, even the ones that we haven't wanted to work with going forward, they've all known this secret. They've all got the memo. They know this secret sauce of the doubling principle. So every single company I've seen over 24 years has got this memo. What about all those companies that I wasn't seeing that were great businesses but hadn't had these moments. And that came to light very recently, last November. So I set up a business with Rosaline Blair, one of my co-founders, and Ollie Barrett, who was up here earlier, and called the Superscalers. And the Superscalers is all about getting underrepresented founders to accelerate their business to superscale, which is £50 million revenue. So it's a peer-to-peer community. We try and collapse the time it takes for you to superscale, and we really try and help you navigate a system which you may not be part of, you may not have a network. And it's really starting to make a difference already within 6 months. But what happened in December is I had about 150 women who joined the community, all got to their 1 million revenue, all wanting to grow. I went through a story and we started talking about mindset and why mindset is so important. And we talked about these principles of doubling, these principles of scale. And one of my key takeaways was the next stage of your growth should be absolute minimum doubling from where you are today. Wherever you are, doesn't matter if you're 20 grand or 20 million, the next stage is no less than doubling. And then in your head, you have to plan to double again. So 2 doubling journeys time. And if you don't plan for that, you'll never get there. And then in your head, in your wildest dreams, you think 10 doubling journeys time. I thought this was sort of quite ordinary and something that was just in my DNA. The shocked faces of these 150 women for what have you just told me made me think this is actually the secret sauce. I had one woman who came away saying I was going to give up. I was going to just give up my business. It was too hard. Said I'm going to go for it again. Another person who thought maybe I'll sell it said actually I'm going to keep scaling it. I've realised I've done the hardest part. The transformation to those female founders, just realising that this is how growth works. It isn't linear. You don't get to 5 million turnover and then your next stage is 5.5. That's not how it works. When you're at 5 million, you have to go for 10. There is exponential growth in the system. So that concept, massive difference. And now, once you've heard it, you start to see it everywhere. Every company you look at, go back to the beginning and you'll start to see these doubling journeys replicate, and they're almost identical, irrespective of sector. So let's have a little look at my journey. So my finnCap journey, I took that business from a startup, actually 1 million turnover a week, 1 million turnover a year to 1 million turnover a week. And I think to demonstrate this, what exponential growth is about, it took me the first 10 years to get to 3 million revenue. It took me the second 10 years to get to over 50 million of revenue. So that's what exponential growth looks like. 10 years to do 3 million, the next 10 years to do the other 47. So it's quite different. So if I'd stopped at the 3, thinking it was too hard, I never would have got to that 50. So looking at exponential growth is key. So I had 2 key moments for me where I thought, right, I'm ready to scale and I'm ready to superscale. And I remember them very clearly. So my first moment was the summer of 2006. I don't remember much about the summer at all, but I remember that summer wanting to scale my business. I'd set it up 8 years before. It was a division. I was 23. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But I got to that point 8 years later where I thought, right, I'm ready. I know it feels right now to go for the next stage. We were about 3 million turnover at the time. We'd been that steady at that for 2 or 3 years. But I felt absolutely ready we needed to go to the next stage. And that's what led to our MBO. The second point, when I was ready to superscale, and I remember this even more vividly, was in the spring of 2017, and I was walking along the street, very near here actually, in the city with my chairman, John Moulton. And we were walking along and saying, look, we've got to 5% market share. I think we can get to 10, but I think we really got more in it. I think we need to buy something. We've been around for 20 years. We haven't acquired anything yet. I think this is time to acquire and get really big. And he turned around to me, and clearly he thought the same thing and probably was waiting for me to say that for a few months. But that was a real moment saying, we are going to go for it now. We are going to make an acquisition. We're ready. It's taken me 20 years, which is quite a long time, but I'm ready to do it now. So everyone finds their moment at a different time. Entrepreneurs are individuals, and I think when you feel the time is right to scale or to super scale is when you feel ready. There is no set path to when feels right. So I'm going to talk about my journey in some stages. So stage one, I call the iterating stage. It's sort of that finding out what works. And you're going through, at this point, many, many, many doubling journeys. And this is why it's so hard to get to the first £1 million. And when I see businesses who've tried so hard, and sometimes it takes 10 years to get to £1 million, it's not unusual. And people think, oh God, I'm so tired. That's because you've been through so many doubling journeys. If you start with 20 grand's worth of income, it takes you a long time to get to £1 million doubling. But the good news is doubling takes the same amount of time and effort every time you double. So for me, going from 25 million to 50 million was the same energy it took me to go from £200,000 to £400,000 worth of revenue. The same. And that's why I really want to encourage people to keep going on the journey, because it becomes easier. The numbers just become bigger. So you've gone through many, many different doubling journeys. It's a learn, it's an iterate phase. I don't remember even feeling like an entrepreneur at any point in this journey. It took me pretty much 8 years to get through this stage. I said I started at age 24, had no idea what was going on. I had a desk, an office, a phone. I started an investment bank. I didn't really know that I was starting an investment bank at that time. I think the speed with which you grow at this point is whether you fundraise or whether you bootstrap your business. I decided to bootstrap. We had no cash. We just invested whatever profits we made out of the deals we were doing into growing the team. So it started off with one person, a couple of years later, 2 people, a couple of years later, 3 people. It was really, really slow growth. And I put that down to the fact that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a network. I had no one to talk to. There were not all these accelerators and great things for startups we have now. So I was just sort of head down, no marketing, just getting on with it, winning more clients, until I turned around 8 years later and thought, oh, we got a bit of a business here and I feel ready to go to the next stage. So no fundraising at that point. And the first million was absolutely the hardest bit. So you found your winning formula at some point in that 1 to 3 million. And the time it takes you could be anything from 1 year, very quick, to 10 years. So the second stage I call the scale-up phase. So this is where all the iteration, all the work you've done on testing clients, seeing what works, you found something that is consistent. You found something that consistently people are coming back for time and time again to buy from you. It's not one big client, it's lots of people buying from you, and you have got something. And at that point, I worked out for me what we had. And that led us to scale to the next stage of 10 million revenue. And that special thing for us was we were going to treat SMEs completely different to any other investment bank. We were going to treat them like the most important people rather than give them the most junior team. So we wanted to care about these clients more than anybody else and give them the best service possible. So that was our sort of USP, that was our differentiator, our culture, and that's what we used to drive our scale. So at that point, we had a plan. We had a £10 million plan. That's where we were going to go to next. Our vision was completely clear. And we went in 4 years from 3.8 million to 4.8 million to 7.8 to 12.9. And I would say that stage was really fun. And actually was quite easy. Relative to the first 10 years, I loved this bit. It was about hiring, finding people that fit. Mistakes can be costly, but you can rectify those very quickly. You're utterly focused on your client. Everything is about the client. And we were reinvesting all our profits. We had raised £1 million just at the start of that journey, half of which came from our team, half of which came from my parent company that was our backer. So we had a lot of support from the team. And when I set out that 10 million goal, I had in my head this 50 million vision of, I think we can now get to 50 million. I never told anyone, but it was in my head. So we had this 10 million plan, and in my head, £50 million vision. So stage 3. I thought this was going to be really quick. I was super excited about this stage. We were generating money, we were very profitable. But what happened was the market turned against us. So at 10 million, we said, right, next plan is 20 million. Still in the back of my head, I'm thinking 50 million. This is where we're going longer term. But to my team, it was like 20 million. This is where we're going next. the market was absolutely terrible. We had a really tough market. So this really was about a step back to go forward. We had a big blip in 2011. We went back to 9 million. We were just about profitable. It was pretty scary because we were very tight for cash because we'd only ever raised this £1 million. We were tight as tight can be for cash. 2013, though, went back up to 15.8, made a decent profit. 2014, 18 million. And then the next year, another blip, came back down again. But that was a smaller blip. The market was bad, but nowhere near as bad as in 2011. And we got back up to that 20 million in 2016. So that period took 6 years to double again. So 10 years to go from 0.3, the 4 years to go from 3 to 10, and then another 6 years to go from 10 to 20. So this was hard work, this was. And you're starting to think, oh, have we really got something here? You know, you've got lots of lumps and bumps, but we knew we had a trajectory and we could get to the 20. And what we would do in this stage is look at our clients and think, right, we did our core service really well. They bought that from us. What else can we do? So this 6-year period was about adding new services, a new thing pretty much each year, which, you know, they could be from, we launched investment companies, we launched private company fundraisings, we launched an M&A division. We launched a fund, which actually went spectacularly wrong. But, you know, lots of things failed, lots of things worked. But this was about trying new things and finding new products for customers. So that was lumpy. That was a bit stressful. Took much longer than I thought, but we got to 20. What happened in stage 4 was quite interesting. This, at 20 to 50 million journey, this was when, and it happened quite quick, this was when I got stuck. So the very start of this journey, around just before the 20 million level, we flatlined. We were 20-ish million for a number of years. And this is the first time this happened to me. It was the first time we thought, right, we can't just hire more people. We can't just put more products in. We can't just put more services in. We can't just motor through a bad market. What are we going to do? And if you remember back to me saying, I've always had this 50 million vision in my head. What happened was I'd stuck this limiting belief completely unknowingly in my head. So when I got stuck, I had this amazing conversation with a mentor who was running a very big bank. And he said to me, okay, what's going on here? How big do you think you could get? I said, well, I'm trying to get to 50 million, but yeah, I'm getting stuck. And he said, well, how big do you think you really could get? And I was saying, well, I've always thought 50 million. He said, but could you get bigger than that? I'm like, well, I haven't really thought about it. And he said, okay, so you're going to ask me this question. With limitless time and limitless money, how big could you grow this business? And exclude the fact you might be CEO. You might not even be alive at that point in time. But if this business carries on going, how big could it be? And I thought about my nearest competitor, which was Numis at the time, and they were 200 million revenue. I thought, well, if it's not going to be me there and it's limitless time and limitless money, I could definitely get to 200 million, maybe more. I said, okay, well, that's your problem. You have stopped yourself at 50 for some reason, because that's what you thought at the beginning. You've blocked yourself. So open that up, forget about this 50, that's never something we mention again, and start thinking about the 200. I thought, I don't know about this, feels quite big. So I left the lunch, had to walk all the way back to my office, which was about 4 miles, because I was quite stressed about the whole thing, saying, what, was he right there? And he was absolutely right. By the time I get to the office, 2 hours later, I realise, oh my God, I've got this blocker. I'm not seeing anything past 50, so I'm not seeing opportunities. So by the time I sat down at my desk, 200 million was my new internal goal. Again, told no one. And pretty much within weeks, we motored through this 20 million figure. And that's when I started thinking about an acquisition. Because what happens when you put those limits on yourself is they're blockers. When you lift those limits and think really big, you start to see things that you wouldn't otherwise see. You start to see things in what I call the growth window that were not there before. So it's exactly the same day, but suddenly you see a team that you think, oh, that could be really interesting, but it might have felt too big for you before. Suddenly you see an acquisition, which the day before you might have thought, no chance am I doing that. So this constantly moving your vision up, which is why I always say, always think 10 doubling journeys ahead and keep moving that, you will start to open the window of growth and see things that might otherwise not be there. So that led to our acquisition of Cavendish. So in 2019, we finished our IPO. We IPO'd on the London stock market. We bought Cavendish. We hit 24 million turnover, and the next year we hit 38. So yeah, making that acquisition, realising we had to acquire to grow, realising we wanted to keep going. We raised 5 million at that point, together with our IPO, meant we moved through 38 pretty quickly, and the next year was 52. So the growth stage of that super scale, 2017 to 2022, was pretty quick, and it was all about my vision. So some things which I think were really, really key here. This mindset, establishing a growth mindset, committing yourself to growth 100% is so important right at the beginning, that you constantly are in growth mode. Wherever you are, however small you are, however big you are, you constantly have to grow. Businesses don't really just sit and flatline. Businesses either go down or they go up. So if you're not growing, you're probably flatlining, and it's not going to help. So constantly being in growth mindset, no ifs, no buts, you just got to believe. Setting those ambitious targets, you don't need to know how you're going to reach them. That was one thing that I really learned, is by saying to the team, when we were at 1 million, we're going to hit 5. No idea how to hit 5, but by telling them we're going to hit 5 and then working back on a plan, just doubles, triples your chance of actually achieving it just by putting it down and saying you're going to do it. So having a plan, having that figure that is bigger than you're currently thinking makes a massive difference. So constantly expand that vision. Setting these ambitious growth targets. So this is what I said to my female founders that are in the superscalers. Start with where you are currently. Wherever that is, that's absolutely fine. Think of your next milestone as at least doubling your revenue. Then plan to double again. So if you think 2 doubling journeys time, have you got the team in place today that could take you through 2 doubling journeys? If you haven't, doesn't mean you have to replace them today, but does mean you have to start thinking, okay, maybe the next senior hire I make will be someone who can take me through those 2 doubling journeys. And you might just hire a different person who has a different outlook than the person you might have hired to give you 10% growth. So 1 doubling journey, 2 doubling journeys to plan, and then this long-term vision, a 10 times doubling journey. It's massive. It should be really scary, and you have got absolutely no idea how you're going to do it. But that's how big it needs to be to constantly keep opening the window. Now, what I used to do as a little technique to help me is I used to go back to really, really big competitors. So for me, we were in small mid-cap investment banking. So the Goldman Sachs, the Rothschilds of this world were huge for us. We were never really going to compete with them. But what I do is take their financials and I'd go back right to the beginning and say, right, where did they start? And I'd meet them, so, how did you grow this business? What did you add? And you find that every single business, and I haven't worked with a business yet that hasn't followed this rule, grows in only 3 ways. It's a new product or service, it's a new market or geography, or it's a new sector. And that can be organic, or you can do it via acquisition. And that's what Goldman Sachs and Rothschilds did. They started with nothing, they grew. They maybe had 1 equities business, then they had a debt business, then they added on a geography, then they added on a sector. If you look at your own business and look at your biggest competitor, someone way out there, £1 billion company, and go back and look at their numbers, that's what they do. They work out what they're good at, they add products and services, they add new markets and geographies, and they add sectors. And that's how people grow. And everyone starts somewhere. The 6 E's I'll cover very quickly because culture was a key part of what we used to grow, which is all about excite the vision, enroll, getting buy-in. We got everyone to own equity, which was great. Engagement about great culture. Elevating is finding your superstars, so always having those bank of superstars. Energize is about making business fun, making your team want to turn up to work on a Monday. And this is all in, I've left some books actually on some chairs, which is all in my book. Exit. Not everyone will make the journey in growth, and it's how to do it in a really nice way, and also then how to think about how you can exit yourself. Then strategic thinking, making time for this is so important. When we got stuck at that sort of 18, 19 million level, I got some consultants in to see what we could do. And they said something really obvious, but wasn't obvious to me. They said, okay, so if you want to grow, you need one full-time person thinking about growth all the time, full-time. How many people have you got? I'll be like, well, I might spend 20% of my time, and maybe one of my senior team spends 5% of their time. Maybe 25% we've added up to. It's like, well, you're not going to grow. Now you're at this size, sort of 18 million turnover, one full-time person has to be on growth. Doesn't have to be one person, it has to be one full-time equivalent. So 100% of time of one person is spent on growth. So I went away, immediately started to spend 50% of my time on growth, and then split out some of my senior teams' time so they could spend 10 or 20% of time on growth, depending on who they were. So we had one full-time equivalent. So you have to have enough people just focused on growth, because you just will never get out the day-to-day. So that's really important. As you grow, you make the time for it. Scheduling time for that big picture thinking, find what causes you to really get your brain going, give you clarity of thought. Mine is on a plane. I love being on a plane. I get loads of my ideas. My team used to hate it when I get on a plane, because when I get off the plane, it's like, guess what? I've got an idea for you. So whatever works for you, give yourself that time and space. I know as entrepreneurs, we never do that. Be patient, stay flexible. Mindset shift is really quite important here. You will get stuck at some point. I got stuck at 17 million. That was the first time I got stuck. When I went to talk to someone about it, I had no idea that every single business gets stuck at some point. Some may be 1 million, some may be 5 million, some may be 10 million. Can happen at any point, but you will always get stuck. Just knowing that other people got stuck as well absolutely helped me. That was all I needed to know was, oh right, so this isn't that I'm failing. You will get stuck wherever that is. And just getting stuck means you just have to work on one of what I think are 4 things. So it's usually about your brand. It's usually about your sales process. It's about your processes along every single part of your business. And it's about your team. So one of those things will usually be the reason that it's not working. It's not going, yes it is. So, back to my key takeaways. Thinking big, massively important. Set ambitious long-term goals. We talked about this, always think minimum 1 doubling journey ahead. Always plan for 2, always think for 10. That's a really good rule of thumb to constantly make sure you're stretching yourself all the time to think that bit bigger. The scaling culture, I think, is super important. The 6 E's around how you treat people, how you can use your culture to create super scale, to get all your team on board with the vision and helping you to grow, because it is a lonely game. The more you can help, the better. Staying utterly committed to that journey to super scale. You've got to overcome barriers. And I think realizing that every single business was where you were at some point. Everyone was where you were, and we always forget that. I'm so guilty of this. Every time I think, oh, I can't do it, they've done it, they're so much better, but actually they're not. They're just way further ahead. They've just had lots more people to talk to, more clients. You know what you're doing, wherever you are in your journey. Every single other business has been there at some point. And then taking the time for growth. It is an extreme sport. It definitely is an extreme sport. It goes through bursts of, it's exhausting. You might be pitching one day and then you've lost a client and then something's not working, or you lose a team member. Exciting times, difficult markets, great markets. But you've got to take that time to recover. So I always think of it like, an athlete runs a race. They don't go and run another race the next day. They go and have an ice bath, have a bit of a break. As entrepreneurs, we're really not very good at that. So taking that time for that break, I call it slowing down to speed up. Slowing down to speed up is utterly vital. So, in just closing, I would say, remember, every company started where you were. Every company started from 0. 1 million is the absolute hardest place to get to. It is so difficult because it's so many doubling journeys and you don't know what you're doing and you're doing everything by yourself. But from then on, every doubling journey from there takes the same amount of time and the same amount of effort. So this is not the place to give up. This is the place to keep going and say, right, okay, I've done the really hard bit, now it's going to get easier. And with the super scalers we set up, we are trying to encourage as many UK businesses to really think big, to really super scale, because we need so many more great UK, British companies. So I'd encourage everyone to just think that little bit bigger than maybe you did this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That was absolutely incredible, a really kind of rousing speech to get us all going this afternoon. And I think we often see those kind of hockey chart kind of growth curves, don't we? And people look for that. But what you need to realise is, as you say, growth isn't linear. It comes with bumps along the road. So I think that will have offered our guests lots of comfort this afternoon. So thank you very much for that. Another round of applause for Sam, please.